Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin News Show right here on the World Crypto Network. Thanks again, guys, so much for joining us again on this another Sunday to talk Bitcoin. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. We got a couple of topics in here like people suing Bitcoin.com, Coinbase cutting off Wikileaks and cheap air and some other stuff like that. But should be a good time because at the end, we're also going to have a little debate with Mr. Paul Pui, who we will introduce in a minute. So we're looking forward to that, guys. That'll be at the end of the show. Before then, we're just going to go through your quick bits section, which will only take a minute, and we will get into the topics after that. So again, I just wanted to thank, I want to thank everybody who came out to the Denver Meetup last Wednesday. That was a great time over there in Colorado. It was actually originally supposed to be in Boulder, but we moved it to the Grid co-working space, and it was a great time. I just want to thank everybody for coming out. There was pictures taken and hugs being had and hands being shaken. It was a great time. We had, I think, a bunch of people up there on stage. We had, Mr. Mad Bitcoins, Mike Krieger, let's see, we had a bunch of myself, Trace Mayer, and Andy Hoffman, and of course Adam Meister. So there was a bunch of people there up on stage. So we had a great time. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out. And if you want to check where I will be next, you can of course check out my website. I have a calendar on there. That's at theonevortex.com. Now, the next article is pretty interesting. The Bloomberg had an article about ICOs, because we all know there's some crazy ICOs out there. They're not exactly maybe on the level. And so I guess that they are saying now that the best performing ICOs are the ones without working products. So that's kind of an interesting paradigm that we live in here right now, guys. Again, all the links are down below, so make sure to check those out, that they will be here for the quick bit section, and everybody's, of course, contact information too will all be down below. And it looks like it's now official. Bitcoin is the 5th largest economy in the world. In 2017, the BTC on-chain economy had a nominal GDP of over 3.6 trillion. Trillion with a T, people. So Bitcoin is continuously growing. And I know actually Jameson, maybe it was Jameson that posted that continues to give us updated links of where Bitcoin is in the global economy, where our GDP lies. So very interesting stuff. So pay attention to Jameson's Twitter account, guys. Lots of good stuff. Then looks like it was reported that Bitcoin was the ninth most read WikiLeaks article last year, coming out ahead of the sensations like Wonder Woman, Elon Musk, and Star Wars. So people are starting to talk more and more about Bitcoin. It's seemingly becoming a little bit mainstream more and more, guys. So really interesting stuff. I'm really glad to hear that. And then the 17 millionth Bitcoin was just mined. You guys, again, check out the links below. Very interesting stuff. It's going to be a long time, guys, before we have another million Bitcoins mined. So this is going to probably be a very, very, very big milestone. So check that out, guys. Very interesting stuff. And finally, I don't know if you saw this, but I did tweet out that I found this article that has a rumor about NASDAQ maybe launching Bitcoin trading in October of 2018. So check that out, guys. It's a really interesting story. There's some, of course, hearsay. And, so I call it a rumor. It's not fact yet, but we do hope that maybe NASDAQ will get into the game as the CME and CBOE did last year. It is, of course, inevitability for everybody to get into Bitcoin. So without further ado, let's do some introductions and introduce everybody on the panel. Super proud to introduce you guys. Super proud to have these people on the panel today. All amazing Bitcoin enthusiasts, all on Twitter, crypto Twitter, as we like to call it. So very good stuff. So let's first introduce Mr. Jameson Lopp. Jameson, how you doing?
Hey, great to be here once again.
Yes, man. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Former BitGo engineer right there. And then we have Mr. JW, BTC Security Threats. How you doing?
Hey, good. BTCthreats.com.
BTC
but
Threats.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yes. Yeah. BTCthreats.com.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to talking about the stuff that we got going on today. It's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. Thanks again for joining us. And of course, you can always find JW over there at Block Digest as well. And then we have Mr. Paul Pui. Paul, how you doing today? Oh, you're muted, Paul.
Really have to mute there. Hear me okay? Great. Thanks for having me. Paul Pui, CEO of Edge. So happy to chat with you guys for this little beautiful afternoon.
Yes. Thanks so much for joining us, Paul. And we have finally Mr. Udi. How you doing, Udi?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm actually right here at the Bitcoin Embassy in Tel Aviv, where we got to meet Paul last week. I think it was just a week ago, which was a lot of fun. So great to see you again, Paul.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Udi. Yes, very cool, very cool. Everybody knows each other in Bitcoin, guys. It's just kind of a small community, so we try to keep it civil over here. But thanks again for joining us. So let's go ahead and get into the topics here. So the first topic of today being that over 600 now users are seeking a lawsuit against Bitcoin.com. and CEO Roger Ver. So I want it's been kind of a tricky situation about, Roger is increasingly saying that BCH is Bitcoin, and there's some people that are now distancing themselves from that, like Eric Voorhees and others. So I wanted to get some information from the panel and kind of see what they think about this, what they feel like. So Paul, maybe I'll ask you first. What do you think about this lawsuit against Bitcoin.com, and then what do you think about the wallet on the website naming Bitcoin as BCH?
So I do take the stance that right now, at least, I don't believe that Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin. So I take kind of an Eric Voorhees stance. I think that should be very clearly delineated. And I know what Roger's trying to accomplish. He definitely believes strongly in Bitcoin Cash, and so he's going to push that narrative really hard. I do believe that there could be a future where the two do flip, but it would have to be a very, very significant flip before people will start calling Bitcoin Cash Bitcoin. We're definitely not there today. I do think that this lawsuit needs to be incredibly careful, because if the lawsuit is lost and it does it pushes through, then there is this danger now where you now prematurely get people thinking, well, then maybe it is Bitcoin. Maybe Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin because the lawsuit didn't go through. And if you think about it carefully, in a lawsuit, people are suing for fraud. Usually, in the case of a lawsuit, you can't win unless people actually lose money. Even if someone went to Bitcoin.com and actually went to purchase what they thought was Bitcoin and instead got Bitcoin Cash, did they actually lose money is an interesting question. Ironically, since the point that Roger started calling Bitcoin Cash Bitcoin on his website, if people accidentally bought Bitcoin Cash, they'd actually be better off than if they bought Bitcoin. And so where's the loss? And even if they weren't better off, really the loss is the difference of what it would take for them to actually buy Bitcoin with the Bitcoin Cash they accidentally bought. So really, it's not like they lost that amount of money that they were putting into it. They lost the difference in the exchange rate price. So there's misleading that I think that there's definitely an issue with that. But for a full-on class action lawsuit to go through, people have to lose money. And so far, I don't think anyone has. So I think that's a bit of a challenge for the people trying to push that lawsuit forward. And they have to be careful, because if it loses, then you have that risk of people now prematurely being able to scream, oh, well, maybe Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin. So be careful with that.
Great points, Paul. Yeah, it is interesting. The loss of the actual loss argument. That's interesting, Paul. I haven't really heard that too much, because I think the main problem is people feel like they're the fraud part, feeling like they're getting a batch of bad goods or something like that. So very interesting, Paul. Thank you for those points. Let's go to Jameson. Jameson, what do you think on this on the conversation so far? Do you think that this is a bad thing? Do you think that the people are going to win? And do you think that it is fraud?
It gets pretty tricky. I don't like involving any government court systems in this. Maybe this is just civil court systems. And of course, I'm not a lawyer. That's an interesting point about loss, though. And I would expect that if anybody lost anything, it might have been people who bought Bitcoin Cash and then sent them to a SegWit address on Bitcoin, which is really, really hard, if not close to impossible to recover from, unless you've got some good relationships with miners. As to the whole, what is Bitcoin? Is it fraud to call something Bitcoin that most people disagree with? I'm actually kind of nebulous on that. I think that Roger and any Bitcoin Cash supporter has as much authority as anyone else to say that their network is Bitcoin. But what they need to be ready for is the inevitable backlash from the distributed authority, if you will, the distributed consensus that seems to be saying that Bitcoin Cash is not Bitcoin. And much to what Paul said, absolutely, this could change over a short period or a long period of time, because one of my favorite ways to describe this is actually Charlie Lee said, defining Bitcoin is kind of like defining a word. It's this nebulous organic thing that can actually change over time. Nobody has control over. Though I think that just from looking at the back and forth and the debates and the sort of social consensus of what's been going on, it's very strongly on the side of current BTC Bitcoin. I think has the most momentum behind it and the greatest network effect. And it's definitely going to be incredibly difficult, long, drawn-out process, I think, for Bitcoin Cash to achieve the flippening that some of them are hoping for.
Yeah, very interesting, Jameson. I actually posted out a tweet, saying that there is really kind of no true Bitcoin, right? There's a project that has the majority of consensus, and then there are several forks that have, minor consensus. So there is kind of nobody really that can say Bitcoin, but absolutely, Jameson, as you say, this is a passionate bunch of community here, and you're talking about people's livelihoods, people's savings and things like that. So it is going to get messy, I think, no matter what we do. But very interesting points. Let's go to Udi next. Udi, what do you think about this conversation so far? What are your views?
Yeah, so of course I'm not a lawyer either, but when I heard about the lawsuit personally, I was a bit surprised. I'm not sure how these things work, but it feels intuitively to me that in order to sue someone, you need to, as Paul said, you need to lose money. And it's not only that someone needed to lose money, it feels like it probably should be the one filing the lawsuit or, represented by the ones filing the lawsuits. And I'm not sure that's the case. Specifically about Bitcoin Cash, I got a chance to be in touch with a lot of people who are, small Bitcoin buyers, maybe heard about Bitcoin the first time. And I saw the frustration firsthand of having to deal with this confusion of what's actually Bitcoin. Is it Bitcoin Cash? And, why does this website say that this is Bitcoin? And why doesn't it work? And, they're confused about the wallet, and people are, there are companies selling Bitcoins, sometimes face-to-face or over the phone or whatever. There are companies, they're here in the Bitcoin Embassy in Tel Aviv, there are volunteers that are helping people buy Bitcoin. And it's just a lot of pain explaining this. And it's kind of externalizing this cost to these people. But, maybe it is what it is. But yeah, it's definitely not Bitcoin. Definitely not right now. I mean, the consensus is very clear about that.
Yeah, and there is this transition period, of course, that we have to go through, as a planet, just to understand what Bitcoin is. I'm sure it all took all of us many years to get to where we are, and we're still, of course, learning every single day. So there's a lot of ground still left to cover. There is still a lot of confusion, and I think that it can be confusing if you try to go to the Bitcoin website, and download what you think is Bitcoin, and then you get BCH. But as Jameson said, I think most of the losses are going to come from people actually sending Bitcoin to the wrong address and things like that, maybe thinking that they're getting Bitcoin, they get Bitcoin into their BCH address, and or vice versa, right? So that's where it can get really, really confusing for new users. JW, what are your thoughts on this conversation so far? Do you believe that the Bitcoin.com is committing fraud? And what are your thoughts of how we can maybe even fix this?
Yeah, so I think you have to look at it in context of what Bitcoin Cash is. And if you understand at a technical level that Bitcoin Cash is it's a copy of Bitcoin that has two security vulnerabilities in it. One is that it has a block size that's like dangerously large, and the other is that it didn't fix transaction malleability. So if you look at it from that context, you get that technical depth understanding first, then it kind of makes sense why people are so frustrated in what's happening here with the lawsuit, because we don't really have a functional legal system in the United States and basically in any part of the world, because we don't have a free market legal system. And so it's inherently corrupt sort of process that you go through when you engage with government courts. And so I don't think that this is necessarily the best strategy for trying to deal with this problem, but it is a problem, right? When somebody is trying to co-opt a brand name that has existed, and they're trying to use it to introduce security flaws into an open source piece of software. Right now, that might not be clear to everyone, right? Like you may need to be a software security expert with some years of depth to be able to see it like that. But in 5-10 years, I think looking back, it'll be very clear to everyone that Bitcoin Cash was not an attempt to create secure money, and that it was actually an attempt to insert security flaws and slow the adoption of secure money. And I think at that point, we may be looking back on a world that was so corrupt and weird from the standpoint of a world that isn't run by central banks and isn't as fraught with corruption, that from that perspective, we may be able to reach back and grab some of these guys by the scruff of the neck and bring them before a court. Because the people that invested in Bitcoin Cash, they haven't necessarily received a direct financial loss. But the number of people that are suffering as a result of the corruption that is inherently involved with central banking, which is the whole thing that motivated the creation of Bitcoin to destroy, those are the real victims of these sort of attacks. It's not the wealthy guys that are throwing, $5,000 at some altcoin. It's the people in the third world right now that are poor and starving, because we have trade tariffs and we have just a very corrupt, awful system of interacting with them, right? We prevent them from moving basically past the Stone Age into the Industrial Age. Those are the people that are suffering as a result of all these altcoin games and all these goofy little attacks. And I think those are the people that have the best case, but it's going to probably take a few years. And my hope is that the wheels of justice will, if they grind slow, at least they'll grind thoroughly.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we do have, and that's the problem, and that's why I think a lot of Bitcoiners and things like that don't want to go right to the state, don't want to use these court systems because they are so inherently corrupt, or at least have been corrupt for some time now. As the United States has morphed from, these United States into this federal conglomerate police state, military industrial complex, right? So it is a challenge to see how we're going to handle this. I'm very interested to see how the community and how the market handles this, and I hope that we don't have to go, through the whole lawsuit thing, but at the end of the day, we have to use the tools that are available to us as well, to do the best that we can. So we'll see how it goes out. Very interesting comments. Thanks, guys, so much for commenting on this topic. And I think we can move on unless anybody else has anything to add on this one. Nope. Okay. Very cool. So thanks, guys, for this topic. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us. Thanks to everybody in the chat. And if you guys missed the show, make sure to join us in the comments. We try to do the show every Sunday live here at 12 p.m. Pacific over on the World Crypto Network. We have lots of shows over here, guys. So make sure if you are new to hit the subscribe button below. We just went over 60,000 subscribers. So thank you guys so much for that. And if you like what you're seeing, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you don't, well, hit the thumbs down button, because we love criticism as well, guys. So let's go ahead and move on to the next topic here. Both WikiLeaks and Cheap Air were left hanging by Coinbase this week. As Coinbase has shuttered their services, their merchant services for both the WikiLeaks store and now the airline Cheap Air. So I want to hear from you guys. What do you think are some of the options, and maybe what do you think led to this this in the first place? And of course, it's going to have to go. We're going to have to probably talk a little bit about WikiLeaks and things like that, guys. So if you don't like that stuff, then you might want to leave now. But let's go ahead and go with Jameson first. Jameson, what are your thoughts on this? Why do you think this happened? Because we have seen, the WikiLeaks get their payment system shut off by Visa and stuff before. So why do you think this happened again? And do they have any options?
Yeah, I mean, it's more of the same. This really shouldn't be surprising to anyone. The most surprising piece of this story to me was the fact that WikiLeaks hasn't learned their lesson. And so I publicly lambasted them on that. I was like, you're still using trusted third parties to process your money. So you need to fix it yourself, do it right, set up a BTC Pay server or some sort of setup where you're actually receiving your money yourself. And then you can worry about how to dispose of it later if you want to convert it into something else. So, this is what should be expected, especially from Coinbase, which is, trying to be as compliant as possible with all of the different jurisdictions that they're operating in. I'm not sure all of the details of Coinbase's various operations, but I would suspect that their merchant processing is probably a very, very small portion of their overall business. It's probably not a high priority thing for them to be the best merchant processor out there. But I don't really know what else to say. I mean, if you want a censorship-resistant payment network, then you're going to have to actually use it to its full potential and not just fall back to the easier way to process payments.
Great points, Jameson. Decentralization is hard, people. It is hard. And I'm sure all the developers in the space who are actually, are working with these decentralized protocols know, but the regular people don't. They just, oh, I'll just save my money in the Coinbase. No problem. It's the same thing, right? It's still Bitcoin, but it's not, right? As Andreas and so many people have tried to tell us over and over again, if it's not your keys, it's not your Bitcoin. And so people continuously fall back into these easily used centralized systems. And, shout out to BTC Pay Server, because I do want to have their CEO scheduled to be on the show next Sunday. So that we're going to be discussing more of that next Sunday. So tune in for that. But yeah, I mean, there are these amazing solutions like BTC Pay Server out there, and I hope that more people take advantage. But again, it's way more difficult than just hitting Coinbase. So let's go with Paul on this. Paul, what do you think on this whole development? Do you think that WikiLeaks has a chance? I mean, do you think that they should have not been using Coinbase in the first place? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just like Jameson said, I was surprised. I didn't even know that they were using Coinbase. And I had thought from the beginning that they just had pretty much an address. And it was not a shocker. it was still a huge PR nightmare for Coinbase. Whether or not you realize that it's a shocker, but then the irony of it is as well is that it's also coinciding with a time when Coinbase is just simply removing themselves from the payment processing. So it could be a mix of, well, we can't support WikiLeaks, but at the same time we can't support anybody. And I think that's just a virtue of them still, as big as they are, being a startup. And I didn't think that it was a good business model for them to try to accomplish all of the different services they had, a hosted wallet, vault service, payment processor, and a full order matching exchange, and an OTC buy-sell service for consumers. All of that is a very, very large offering. Now, while they're all somewhat symbiotic, it is definitely kind of tough to keep your handle on all aspects of that suite of offerings. But definitely the merchant processing we've seen as being a very small part of cryptocurrency in general over the past 5 years. And so for them to just let go of that makes perfect sense. But to my understanding, however, Coinbase is launching a non-custodial payment processing app of some sort. And so that could be something that potentially WikiLeaks uses if it doesn't use any KYC. So, there's hope. It's literally just collect the money using crypto. There's hundreds of ways to convert it back. If you just convert it back in cash, heck, you'll even get 5% over spot. So I'm not worried about WikiLeaks being able to accept Bitcoin.
Awesome. Well, that's good to hear. It looks like WikiLeaks is still going to be in business then, because this is what the freedom that crypto allows. You can shut down something like Coinbase, but as Paul said, you can just still accept it directly. I mean, there is nothing, literally nothing, stopping you except a connection to the internet from stopping you from receiving payments. So very good points, Paul. Let's go to Udi next. Udi, what are your thoughts on this so far? Is Coinbase, or is Coinbase in the wrong in this? First, let me ask you that, and then second of all, well, do you think that they'll eventually more and more people will start using things like BTC Pay Server, or is it just an inevitability that everybody's just going to stick with these centralized systems?
Yeah, so I don't think we could say that Coinbase is in the wrong, right? I mean, I think it was Andreas Antonopoulos who tweeted something along the lines of Coinbase being bank, and he's thinking of them as a bank. And as a bank, you can expect that this is how they will behave, and you can't really hold it against them. It's their business model, and in order to survive, they have to adhere to some regulations, and that's, I think it's understandable. By the way, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that the account that got shut down is of the WikiLeaks store that sells
correct.
Like merchandise.
Yep.
So the donations, I think that their donations are directly to Bitcoin addresses and some other altcoins that they support, which is definitely the way to go for them. I mean, it's a no-brainer for someone like WikiLeaks. It's pretty obvious that that's what they're going to have to do. So, and yeah, I hope they'll end up using something like BTC Pay, which is great. It's actually, I had a chance to use it a few times just from the backend side too. It's really great.
That's great, and we do see them continuously improving it as well. We see them on Twitter constantly updating, and it's even funny. Like you see like the bug, and they're like, "Oops, we did it again." And, like you see them admit their mistakes on there kind of casually, which is great. They're really kind of making themselves a part of the community, so that's really cool. So let's ask JW. So JW, what do you think, man? With Coinbase having this huge suite of offerings, as Paul mentioned, I mean, is this in any way? Do you think can they keep this secure in any way, or are they just kind of doomed to fail with this amount of offerings?
Well, I mean, I do think they're going to have a really hard time staying in business. I think they've picked some weird business models that really required that Bitcoin get adopted at a rate that most people that were being sober about it would not have believed that Bitcoin was going to be adopted at. Merchant services don't really make sense for Bitcoin today. They might in a year, but there is a phase of saving that has to happen before something becomes really much of a practical medium of exchange, except for niche things. And I think they miscalculated that. And so I think that they raised a lot of money and they've been very effective in certain ways. But as a user, I'm not a huge fan of really anything that they've done. I think from a security standpoint, that database, when it does get leaked, when the Equifax event of Coinbase happens, we're going to look at that as probably one of the worst things that's ever happened to people that use this service. I can't think of anything worse than having a database with your home address and the number of Bitcoins that you've purchased leaked. And I don't think that they have the technical chops to prevent that. I'm not even sure that that's possible, right? That's kind of the whole point of distributed systems in Bitcoin, is that a big fat honeypot of a database is just about impossible to keep connected online and functional, and at the same time keep secure. So there's a lot of reasons that I'm not, necessarily necessarily the biggest fan of what those guys have done, but I do think that it's worth noting that this is a moment of injustice, right? I think there's a kind of an irony with the fact that Bitcoin started getting adopted and got a lot of attention because it prevented WikiLeaks, who, whether you like them or not, are a journalistic organization, right? They publish information. They do what we would want journalists to do as far as report on corruption, report on crimes, whether those are inside or outside of governments. And the fact that they could be shut down without any due process, right? Like, as humans, we all need to eat. We need to be able to purchase things. We need to be able to trade. If you can prevent somebody from doing that without going to court, you're embargoing them, right? You're starving them, and that is not something that should be seen as anything other than a grave injustice. And I get that they take donations through other ways, and there are other solutions, but that doesn't mean that what Coinbase did is any less awful. And I also get that they're subject to regulations and political pressures, and a regulation probably doesn't apply here, but some kind of backroom meeting, nudge, nudge. If you want to get your new ETF, whatever thing approved, do us a favor, we'll do you a favor. It's good political capital. I do think that that's what's in play. And that's the whole point of why people are outraged, right? It's not that there aren't technical solutions. It's that this is disgusting. And it's why we have Bitcoin and why we need Bitcoin. And for one of the biggest, most popular Bitcoin companies to do that, I think is very noteworthy, and I would encourage anybody to use BTC Pay server or anything else in response to this, especially.
Yep, awesome, great points. It is interesting how many people, early in the Bitcoin, the saga itself, like, just kind of miscalculated how Bitcoin is going to be used. I mean, we first thought it was microtransactions, right? Then digital gold, and who knows what we're going to think of next. I mean, but one thing is clear: it is this financial network, this protocol that is accessible to all, that we can build, this platform that we can build, so many amazing things on top of it. So very cool stuff. Thank you for that, JW. I think we can kind of move on to the debate here. If anybody else has any points on this topic. No? Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and move on to the debate. So what I wanted to do here today, guys, is just have a little bit of a debate about the Lightning Network, because this stuff is all so new, guys. We're all still trying to learn. We're trying to figure this out. And, there's new paradigms being created, and new words being created, and all these things. And so I just want to maybe see if we can clear up some confusion here, and maybe get us all on the same page about some of the internals of how Lightning works, because there is so much great material out there put forth by people, volunteers, like videos from Andreas and Block Digest and Ivan on Tech and other people. So there's lots of great stuff I recommend you guys go out and check out. But for today, we're just going to try to have a little debate here about what we think, a little about how we understand how Lightning transactions actually work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Paul open up the floor with let Paul speak and start, and about what he thinks how Lightning transactions work and the like. And then I would like to go to a different person to respond to that. So Paul, first go ahead and just tell us what you think. Tell us why you're here, to debate this, and what your thoughts are.
Got it. So I think this whole kind of me entering the show kind of started off with a co-founder and I doing a podcast, and him mentioning that, in the scope of us talking about adding different currencies and features, he had mentioned that, heck, to us, Lightning is an altcoin. And, I didn't disagree with that to the point of kind of thinking about that statement and saying in so many ways, yes, it is, and starting to feel very strongly about that. Now, once again, this is a very nuanced definition. Of course, to the people that are the maximalists and the purists of Bitcoin, that being the original and first digital currency, to them, everything else is an altcoin. Whereas to me, we are an altcoin wallet. Like, we support multiple different currencies. To us, it's not a derogatory term. It's just a different currency in many ways, shapes, and forms. And so to kind of take that term that was so harped on me personally over the course of a day after that podcast on Twitter. And what I really want to make people realize is, if you remove the emotion behind that term, remove just like oh my God, we're not an altcoin, we're the original Bitcoin, and you actually ask yourself, what even defines an altcoin or a different cryptocurrency? What's different between Litecoin and Doge? What's different between Ethereum and another currency? It starts to fall under a few different categories. And so what I started feeling was, altcoin isn't a very binary thing. It's not an is or it's not. There's many different properties that'll make something feel like that. And Litecoin starts to fit in a whole lot of those properties. So if you think about, first of all, wallet compatibility, like how easy is it for you to get this currency from one wallet to another, compatibility between people, what does that even feel like? Is it acceptable by the same group of people that would accept that same currency? If you ask yourself also, where is the ledger? So we made one statement that people really hated, was that it's a different chain. And it's true, it doesn't have a chain. We know that. We know that there's no chain on Lightning, but a lot of people in the blockchain space just refer to the chain as the ledger, right? You know, the whole DLT, distributed ledger technology, the terms are to take off. Well, if you ask yourself, Lightning does not have the same ledger as Bitcoin. If you want to know what your balance is and you want to know what your transactions are on the Lightning Network, you need to consult two things. You need to consult the blockchain of Bitcoin, and you have to consult all of the pending non-broadcast transactions on Lightning. That is an inherently different ledger by definition. The ledger is different. So that in and of itself is very similar. Once again, it's just more ticks to the definition of what is an altcoin, as well as what's the truth of your balance. If you wanted to know what your balance is, you can't look at the Bitcoin blockchain. You have to look at that. Plus, you have to look at this additional list of signed but unsent transactions. And then all of that, in addition, is a security model that's very different. And there was, I think, a tweet that I didn't want to respond to because I know it will just create a whole thread of wasted time of someone said, hey, it has less security, and couldn't explain exactly why. Well, it has a very different security model. So many can easily argue that it's less. You know, the fact that I can have money on this network and I need to have something, someone, some server or myself constantly watching the network to make sure that I don't get money inadvertently sent by the other person that I'm connected to that could steal money from me. I have to watch for that. The fact that I have to do that is inherently a different security model. The fact that I can't currently, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this one, I can't have any money on Lightning that is also secured via multi-sig of another key that I own. So things like that make it a significantly different kind of currency and payment network. And if you ask yourself, what's the culmination of what is an altcoin? What's the final thing that kind of makes it that definition? Is the value, right? So once something really starts to unpeg and the value starts to become different, then you've kind of achieved that ultimate, like, okay, we're a different currency. And granted, my co-founder, William, when he said that statement of it being an altcoin, he did state that everything other than the value, because it is a one-to-one peg. However, if you really ask yourself very, very carefully, if Lightning takes off and it really becomes the true payment network that, you know, everyone in Bitcoin is hoping for, why should it have the same value? Right? You have a different payment network, different people accepting it. It's theoretically cheaper, faster, instant. Why would it be the same value as Bitcoin? Why couldn't it unpeg and suddenly be worth even more? Or to some people, in the worst case, well, they don't like the security model, it becomes worth significantly less and they want real on-chain transactions. There's no real reason why we can fundamentally believe that it will have 100% dollar for dollar peg between on-chain Bitcoin and Lightning. And so once again, these are nuanced definitions. This isn't just that, oh, it's an altcoin, I thought it was Doge. Obviously, I know that it's not that. It's really analyzing what is all of the differences. And people will make the analogy of, oh, well, you know, that's the same as dollars that are on PayPal versus dollars in my bank. Sure, that has a slight aspect of altcoinness to it, but not the same degree that Lightning has. And granted, I hope you understand that given all of this, and even in that one statement, doesn't mean I don't want Lightning to work. I have concerns over it, and I think many people do. Even talking to Alex Bosworth, who I saw in person when I was in Santa Clara at a conference on a panel with him, he still has some concerns that he feels like there are still some unanswered questions that the ecosystem needs to build out. And I'm thinking, and our team is thinking about how to solve some of those problems. I think one of them we may have a solution for, but we're not sure. Point being is we want solutions for the cryptocurrency space to work. I was called one of the biggest enemies of Bitcoin for some reason, even though we've been building on this tech for 5 years and have paid everyone in Bitcoin for the past 5 years and given away tens of thousands of dollars worth at this point of Bitcoin in the past 5 years. I don't know how anyone would call us the enemy of Bitcoin, just because we want to support the greater cryptocurrency ecosystem, and we want to point out where there are, you know, honest issues with a protocol, and that we believe it's so significantly different it could feel like a different coin in many ways. Why are we then some of the biggest enemies and have done many bad things for Bitcoin? And that's probably the most frustrating thing about being in this space that's discouraged me about it, is that we can no longer have constructive conversation about it. Instead, it just becomes just slander and throwing names. And that's what I felt like over the past couple of weeks on Twitter. And so that's my honest take. Like I really want cryptocurrency as a technology to work out one way or another, whether it's Lightning, whether it's bigger blocks, or it's a combination of both, which is what I originally thought we would need anyway. But hard to have a really good discussion. I'm glad that you're able to have me on here and kind of voice how I feel. Hopefully that makes people realize that, you know, we have good interests. And I honestly think all sides have honestly good interest at heart. It's just that they disagree fundamentally on, you know, how to get there.
And of course, you know, 240 characters isn't or 280 characters isn't exactly, you know, a whole lot to describe these very complex topics and things like that. And of course, I certainly have a few things, you know, to say about those comments of yours, Paul, and stuff. But I think I want to, you know, I definitely want to leave it to people much smarter than myself first, so to see what people think. So what I want to do is I wanted to ask somebody else. Now we'll go with Jameson to see, you know, to have you see what you think about that. Then Paul will have you be able to counter to that, and then we'll maybe go to a different person. So Jameson, go ahead, and the floor is yours on your thoughts on what Paul said.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree that you know, from a tech standpoint, you know, what we have here are two very different protocols. It just so happens that one of the protocols is kind of dependent on the other one. It's kind of like arguing about, you know, how do we define Bitcoin itself? How do we define altcoins? That's why some of this has been fascinating to follow along just from a social standpoint. I would think that it's actually going to be up to us as developers, and developers are going to have a lot of sway over, I guess, how altcoiny the Lightning Network ends up being. And so sort of to Paul's point, like if the developers of these wallets really wanted to, they could create hard distinctions and differentiations between like your Lightning balance and your on-chain balance and whatnot. You could also go the other way and try to abstract away as much of what's going on under the hood and just say, this is your balance, and then try to build in logic that is, you know, automatically figuring out how much needs to be on Lightning, how much needs to be on-chain, et cetera, et cetera. So I can very easily see sort of Lightning funds versus on-chain funds diverging or converging. I think it would be really surprising if we saw much of a divergence from an exchange rate standpoint. But that, once again, is going to come down to, I think, how the exchanges actually implement this. Are we going to see centralized exchanges basically create a new wallet for your account that is like your Lightning wallet? Or are they going to just sort of ball them all up in one and say, this is your balance, and you know, default to using one way to receive and send deposits versus another? There's definitely a lot of questions, I think, as to which way this is going to go. But I do think that it would get a lot more complicated because we remember that Lightning Network is not just for Bitcoin, it is potentially for any blockchain. If we all of a sudden double the number of different exchange pairs that are happening, where now you have, you know, basically put an L in front of everything, Lightning this, Lightning that, I would prefer that we try to stay away from that happening, just from a usability and sanity standpoint. But I think it's good to have conversations like these, because I am focused a lot on usability, and I think that if we want crypto in general to become more mainstream, then we can have all this type of bickering between those of us that are spending our entire lives worrying about it. But the average person shouldn't really even have to know the difference between if they're doing stuff on-chain, off-chain, whatever. We just want them to have a nice user interface, and they can push the button and the money gets to where it's supposed to go.
Yep, absolutely great points, Jameson. I mean, it really is going to be up to the developers in the space to, as Paul said, you know, everybody's trying to figure this out now. And then as Jameson said, ultimately, it's going to be the developers that implement what we want, right? And so it could eventually diverge to some craziness where we're putting an L in front of everything, right? I don't think we want to go that route. I do think that developers want to keep this, you know, inside of Bitcoin as much as possible, and really want to keep the balance of your Bitcoin the same, you know, whether it's on Lightning or on chain, or at least in the UI. So Paul, what are your thoughts on what Jameson said?
Actually, Jameson really hit on the dot, because being able to hold an identical balance where that is abstracted from the user, from whether or not they're sending money on Lightning versus on chain, And I've analyzed being able to abstract that out very, very carefully and haven't found a way to do that. I was even in a talk one-on-one with Elizabeth Stark herself and said, okay, what is it going to feel like? What do you propose it feel like for someone to use a Lightning wallet? It was, well, you send Bitcoin to it like you normally would. Okay, great. And then what? I want to pay someone on Lightning. What happens? Well, the wallet would automatically open up, some amount of channels. I'll go, well, how many? It was kind of the answer. It was kind of like a shrug, maybe 3. I'm like, okay, well, how much money would it put in those 3 channels? And would I have a choice? Because if it's abstracted, then that means I shouldn't need to have a choice. Just, well, maybe split your funds 3 ways. Okay, great. What happens if I want to send a Lightning payment that is 90% of the amount of money that I just deposited into these apparently 3 channels that were hidden from me? Well, then the channels would have to get consolidated and you'd have to transfer money from one to another, which could take a day. I'm like, oh, and depending on what the timeout is for that channel. And she said, oh, well, you can also pay directly to somebody who's not on Lightning and just pay a regular Bitcoin transaction. I go, okay, but to my understanding, and once again, anyone who might be more knowledgeable on Lightning than me, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I've studied it pretty heavily. If you want to make an on-chain transaction, there's no guarantee that the money can actually get unlocked unless the other person that you're connected to actually unlocks it at the same time as you. And so you may have to wait, once again, the same timeout, which could be, she was recommending, about a day. So to me, having money in my own keys to send an on-chain transaction versus having to unlock money on a Lightning Network channel to be able to send on-chain are 2 very, very different things. And I don't think, no one has proposed anything to me that allows us to abstract out funds that are on Lightning versus funds that are off Lightning. And if we're not able to abstract that out, that's going to be one gigantic checkbox for these 2 are feeling more altcoiny between each other. Then we can just abstract them as just one thing and the user doesn't have to care. Will that create a divergence in price? I think that's the hardest thing that would happen. And so, like you said, us having these different trading pairs of, LTC versus LTCL and whatnot are the least likely to happen. Much like US dollar, we still call it USD, even if it's in different payment networks, even though that already can create as much as a 30–40% difference in value. I think you guys probably have seen this if you've ever tried to trade Bitcoin and local Bitcoins with dollars that are cash versus dollars in a bank versus dollars that are on a green dot card versus dollars that are in PayPal. They'll all have very, very different values, but we still call them US dollars. So I don't think we're going to get as far as having these different actual trading pairs, but I think in wallets, until I see something different, we will have to have specific wallets and specific channels loaded up with specific amount of funds that are separate than your on-chain wallets. And that's not necessarily a dead in the water. It doesn't mean Lightning can't work. It doesn't mean we can't use it. It's just feeling much more like a separate currency and a separate coin.
So I do believe that they're working on like atomic multipath payments. So I think that they are working on that where you can where it will figure out how much it needs to send and can actually send the correct amounts based on the channel. So it can see how many channels are open. And you say you want to send something from A to B. You send that and it'll automatically determine how many channels are open and send the money automatically through whatever the fastest route is through that channel or through the multiple channels. So it'll see which channels it needs to go and just automatically push that amount. And again, you don't have to update every single transaction. You just update the state of the channel, right? Does that make any sense?
You're correct. You're updating the state of the channel, but you've got three different channels with 3 different entities, of which different connectivity to the network. So it's possible that the person that I want to pay is actually connected to channel A, but they're not connected to channel B and C. And one of you guys that's maybe more understanding, maybe Udi, I mean, is it possible then to route it through me? Because I'm connected on these 3 channels. Can that money go from channel B into channel A without having to unload the channel and reload it back up into channel A? That I'm not aware is possible, but once again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure, Udi. So Udi, let's go to you. A perfect transition. What do you think on Paul's thoughts so far?
Actually, the last example, I didn't quite get it. I'd love to hear again, Paul, if you could.
Oh, so the fact that if I have my wallet invisibly loading up, like, say, 3 different channels, that gives me a high likelihood of being connected to the entire Lightning network and being able to send and receive payment from anyone on the network, right? That's the goal of loading. Otherwise, I would just load 1 channel. Why load 3? But if I did do that, then how would I go about making a payment to someone that I'm connected through on channel A, but using funds on multiple that I've loaded into multiple channels? Because I might not have enough funds on channel A. So I've got, say, 5 Bitcoin on 1, 5, and 5. I've got 15 Bitcoin, but I want to pay 11 Bitcoin to one person on channel A, how would I go about doing that and making the user experience to the user as if it was just all one giant balance of three channels plus my on-chain money? Is that possible?
Yeah, so if you have like 3 channels and only one of them is somehow connected to your, to the receiver you're targeting, then you can only use that channel for sending money to that single person that you have access to only through that channel. And even a larger point than that, I would say while Lightning is definitely getting better and it's getting better fast in the last few months, I really don't think that it's ready for implementation in wallets. And I think I watched some of the part of the video with Paul and his co-founder where they were talking about Lightning, and I actually agree with a lot of their points. I mean, they're getting requests, and a lot of wallet developers are getting requests from fans and from users asking for, when Lightning, right? When can we use Lightning on a wallet? And the truth is, it's not ready yet. I mean, I think the best thing that wallet developers can do is probably try to contribute to the protocol or learn from contributions being made to the protocol, but it's probably way too early to start, implementing Lightning support in a wallet like Edge. I don't think it's so. For reasons like like this one, there are a lot of problems that we need to solve. Yeah, what was that?
Go ahead, Yudi.
Yeah, sure. So, but then again, I think that meanings and words are really important. It's getting generally in the Bitcoin space and the blockchain space, right? It's getting very difficult to use words because everyone has very liberal meanings for pretty much everything these days. Mining is now something you can do on your phone by watching ads, and it's pretty much everything. So I'm trying to stick to meanings I know and can understand, and because I feel it's really important. I looked up before we started this. It turns out that I think it's called Investopedia. There's a website for people doing financial stuff, and they actually have a definition for altcoin. They also have a definition for shitcoin, but that's something else. And they define altcoin as an alternative coin to Bitcoin because that's how we started using this term. And I think that it makes sense to keep using this term. And if we look at what Lightning is technically, I'm simplifying things, but technically Lightning is Bitcoin in multi-sig, which is also time locked, right? And there's some other stuff, but this is mainly what it is. And if I'm thinking about, maybe I have, forget about Lightning, maybe I have 5 Bitcoins time locked somewhere because, I have this contract with someone and I'm only getting them in a year from now. So are those Bitcoin an altcoin now? Obviously, if you try to use them in a wallet like Edge or any other wallet, you're probably not even going to see them. And so you're going to have to be able to technically interpret what this transaction means. And this is not going to be with any standard wallet whatsoever. But you can do it. And I don't think anyone would consider this an altcoin, even though it will probably have a lower value, right? Because I can only move it in a year. So if I'm trying to sell this commitment to someone else, we'll probably pay less than 5 Bitcoins for it. So, but I think we can generally agree that it's Bitcoin, but it's Bitcoin that I can only use in 1 year from now. And the same is true for multi-sig, and it gets even crazier if you think about stuff like Ethereum. In Ethereum, you can have contracts that can do, pretty much anything that you can write up in code, and you can have infinite ways to describe in an Ethereum contract that I have 5 ethers. There's literally infinite ways to describe that in a contract, and no wallet can possibly understand all of these options and show it to the user. For example, if I run an ICO, I'm not, but if I were to run an ICO and, I maybe I'm going to lock my the ethers that I'm going to get in the crowd sale and not allow them to move until the crowd sale is over. So, they're locked for 2 weeks and no wallet can understand that, but I know that, and everyone reading the contract knows that. And we all agree that those are ethers, even though there are some arbitrary rules about how we're going to move them. And, I think that this is important to have this basic, meanings and definitions to words, because otherwise we're going to have a very hard time to communicate. That's the way I see it.
But lots of good points. What I kind of take away is that Lightning really is this network for smaller payments. So I don't think we should make it together, Paul, like together with one balance as your Bitcoin, as your on-chain. It really should be separate as far as the user interface goes. And remember, your example was like 5 Bitcoin and 5 Bitcoin, but Lightning is really not meant to handle that many Bitcoin. I think that the max is around 20 Bitcoin. I mean, around that we're saying that is safe right now, but I would say that's way too much for safe on the Lightning Network, because it really is meant to do these smaller transactions. And so, at least in the beginning, I really don't think we'll be putting that much Bitcoin on it. But like Udi said here, we still have to call it Bitcoin because it's just time locked, right? It's just time locked. So if I, for example, sign a Bitcoin transaction right now, Paul, right, and I don't broadcast it, I just gave it to you on a floppy disk or something, is that still Bitcoin? Like, right, it should still be Bitcoin, right? It's just we haven't broadcasted it to the network yet. So
it's not fungible because nobody has floppy disks.
Yeah, exactly, Jameson. So let me get your thoughts on that, Paul, and then we'll go to JW.
So a lot of people did make that argument of, well, okay, so say I put Bitcoin on a multi-sig address and now it takes 3 people to unlock it. Well, is that no longer Bitcoin? It's now an altcoin. Well, you didn't make a payment network by doing that. Like, there isn't a payment network by just simply putting Bitcoin in an address that's now harder to unlock. Whereas Lightning is an actual payment network. It's an entire layer on top of it, and you can actually transfer these Lightning credits between each other, independent of transferring Bitcoin between each other. And in the same sense, if you think about it, it's not much different from a sidechain from the viewpoint of the end user. So think about it from the viewpoint of the end user. Also think about it from the viewpoint of the protocol. What is my balance? How much do I have? And what are my transactions? It's similar to a sidechain. It's off-chain. It's somewhat like a sidechain. And in the same sense, SBTC, Smart BTC, which is for RSK, is considered almost, it has a different ticker, right? It's SBTC. It is pegged 1-to-1 with Bitcoin. So for every one, you can get another. But it takes a day to get it from the main chain onto the side chain of RSK. So what are they looking at doing? They're actually looking at having that as an exchange pair on Shapeshift, where you trade BTC for SBTC. Guess what? It's no longer Bitcoin with only one ticker symbol. Now, granted, that's a day. So therefore, the fact that it takes so long is the reason why they're inclined to do this. Now, is it an altcoin or is it not? It's just how many different things now are different about it. So once again, the wallet compatibility, the acceptability between people. What is your balance? Where's the source of truth of transactions? What's the security model? And then, of course, is there a value difference? That being kind of the final thing, which I think SBTC and like Bitcoin on Lightning will likely have a very small value difference. But all of that contributes to it. Sure. Put some Bitcoin away off in a safe. Yeah, it's not on a different payment network. No one else can accept it on a payment network. You just stored your Bitcoin for your own self in a different manner. But once you've created a way for different people to interact and different people to transfer value with a currency, now there's the potential that you've changed the entire payment network. And I think one of the comments you made was Lightning is not a payment network. And that was the one I said, okay, I'm not going to try to argue that one with you, because that one I feel extremely strongly about. It absolutely is a payment network. And I said, okay, let's just wait till I get on the show. So fundamentally, yes, I'd like to hear anyone else on the panel try to say that Lightning Network is not a payment network, because fundamentally, I do think it is a payment network, the same sense that Bitcoin is a payment network in addition to it also being a currency. It's actually one of the only currencies that has a built-in payment network in and of itself, which is why, as a currency, it's easier to create an alt currency to it. The definition of altcoin is that it's a currency that's different than Bitcoin. Prior to cryptocurrencies, the only thing it was just the money itself. It wasn't the payment network. Once you got into cryptocurrencies, our coins became both. They became both a payment network and the actual value. So changing half of it now significantly changes the definition, and it gets you much closer to becoming an altcoin by changing the payment network. So it's now contributing to that significantly.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just push back a little bit before we go to JW. Basically, the reason why I say it's not a payment network or a currency is because you're actually not exchanging currency, Paul, on the network, right? You're updating the state. You're updating the channel state. You're not actually exchanging any currency. The payment network itself is still Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the payment network that you broadcast your Lightning payments to, right? So you update your channel state, and when the final state is done, you broadcast back your your current payments back to the payment network that is Bitcoin. And so that's kind of my pushback on that. Because remember, you're not sending transactions, right? It's a network for sending around you're not sending Lightning transactions. It's a network for sending around signed Bitcoin transactions, right? That have not been broadcasted to the chain yet. So, but this is why we're trying to figure this all out.
But that would make every single fiat digital payment network not a payment network, because you're not actually transferring any fiat on any digital payment network of fiat. No money actually moves; it gets settled later. So you're then by your definition calling Visa not a payment network, SWIFT not a payment network, ACH not a payment network. You name it, all of them are no longer payment networks by your definition.
Interesting. So let's go with JW then and get his thoughts on this. What are your thoughts so far, JW, on this? And then we'll go to Paul after you, JW.
Sorry, I'm just taking some blood pressure medication here, waiting for my opportunity.
Sorry to wait so long, JW.
No, not at all, man. But yeah, I think it's good to take a step back and put this in context, right? So Lightning Network, we can debate technically what's going on here. The only thing I really want to say for the context of this conversation is that Lightning Network is simply Bitcoin transactions that are delayed in creative ways so that we can transact without having to pay on-chain fees. So that's probably a definition everybody agrees with. But at the end of the day, it's like trying to say that a delayed Bitcoin transaction could result in it being an altcoin just is absolutely bonkers to me. And I think that's why I want to take a step back and put this in context, because there's a lot of motivation to be against the Lightning Network. And I think that's why there's so much rage that Paul's experienced on Twitter. And the motivation is, look, the only reason that we've had a lot of these altcoins, from Litecoin to Dogecoin to whatever, is people have said Bitcoin can't scale. Now, it's stupid because when you create another coin that doesn't scale any better than Bitcoin did, but you can fudge with the security parameter, which is the maximum block size, destroy the security, and then push more transactions through, like bcash's roadmap has, that doesn't actually do anything, right? Like, obviously, we could do that on Bitcoin. What Lightning represents is a breakthrough where we realized we can actually scale Bitcoin effectively, maybe even down to super micropayments, but certainly, the coffee purchases, the $500 Best Buy run, all of that stuff could be done just by doing Bitcoin transactions in a creative way and not always broadcasting them to the network. And that is a really, really important breakthrough. Now, the problem with that breakthrough is that it shows how stupid all these altcoins are. And if you're somebody that has a business model that's predicated and really depends on multiple altcoins existing into the future, then you're not going to be a fan of Litecoin. And you're going to have conversations like I feel like the one that we've just had for the last hour that are really not getting into the technical details. They're kind of bubbling around the surface and just creating a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt for people that aren't highly technical. If we wanted to actually get into, is there a security flaw in Litecoin, the conversation would be totally different. Or is the security, the user experience going to be flawed? It would look totally different. This is just, this has really been very, very good marketing for altcoins. And I don't think it's been anything else.
Interesting points. Go ahead, Paul. You want to respond?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, JW, because we were having a technical discussion actually about whether or not we can abstract out payments between a wallet that has both on-chain money and money that was on the Lightning Network. And so I think that we were actually having
no, man.
criticism about that. And we were talking about how to have that solved.
You can install a wallet right now.
And there weren't. So I have installed a Lightning wallet, and I cannot send a payment between my laptop sitting in the same house as my desktop.
There's a good, so that's fine, but there's a good reason.
My point is, my point. This isn't my point. My point being is that you're trying to make a statement that we weren't having a good technical discussion, and that if it were, it would be very different, as opposed to being in marketing for people that are trying to push altcoins. And then I don't think, please, anyone else on the panel, correct me if I'm wrong, at any point was I trying to push altcoins. I was trying to find, how would this feel? How does the feeling of using Lightning get abstracted out so that it can feel like it's Bitcoin? And I asked those as honest questions.
And I don't think JW was pointing at you, Paul, or anything. I think he was just trying to bring the situation, bring the context out.
He just talked about this being for the past half an hour of our discussion. And I'm like, well, then that's us. That's
okay. Let me respond to that.
In the course of that time, we have been talking very constructively about how to try to accomplish that. And I've asked those open-ended questions without a response. Your statement for the past 30, 60 seconds had absolutely nothing technical in it. And I had a bunch of unsubstantiated statements. The fact that, okay, well, suddenly these other coins are destroying security. That was a very unsubstantiated statement. Now, there could be aspects of it changing the security, but so does that also exist with Lightning. It changes the security model. Whether or not it's destroying it in one person's opinion versus another is very different.
So
those are
here's
just
the thing.
very,
if we were going to have
very blatant statements that have nothing backing them.
So let me respond to that, because you've gotten to talk for probably 40% of this whole conversation.
Well, I'm one out of five. I'm one out of five people.
Come on, JW. And that's my fault. If anybody's fault, that's my fault, JW.
No, I'm just asking for time now. Right?
Yeah, I should get at least 50% of the time. So 40% is pretty good.
Okay, well, you got to give me more than 2% if I'm going to have a chance to respond to all of those things. So what I'm saying is that the conversation in general around Lightning, the real context here is very much oriented towards altcoins and the conversation around Bitcoin Cash in particular, right? So that is the context in which all of this debate is happening. Now, this conversation that we've had so far on this channel, I think most of the people that are listening to it that are not technical experts, they're trying to understand, is Lightning going to work? Is it viable to scale? And if it is or isn't, what are the alternatives, right? And I think this conversation for anybody that's not technical will give them the impression that there's a whole lot of problems, a whole lot of unanswered questions with Lightning. And the truth is that you can install Lightning right now and you can send payments. Now, if it fails for some reason or there's a problem, you can get an answer to why it failed. And the answer is not something that would cause you to think that Lightning is untenable. So that is the sort of technical discussion that we, if we were all actually actively working on Lightning, we would probably have, right? We would test it, we would run into problems, we would open bugs, we would discuss that specific issue. This conversation has been very high level. And the problem with that, especially given our audience, is that they're going to get the impression that Lightning may not work. And that's not true, because you can install it right now and it will work. And the alternatives are absolutely absurd. Increasing the block size, doubling it or tripling it is not viable, right? There's nobody on the panel that's technical. Well, you can say it's unsubstantiated, but that is the core of the debate. Because if we could triple or quadruple the block size without introducing security flaws, you're right, we wouldn't need Lightning. But we need Lightning because that is a bad security design flaw that would cause major problems. Now, Lightning does have a different security model in the sense that there's different ways that you can attack it. But there's very smart people that are working on it. It is not an altcoin. It is simply Bitcoin transactions that are delayed in creative ways to allow us to transact without having to put everything on the blockchain. It does work. It will work. There's going to be problems with it because it's new software. But it is going to make all of these altcoins that your wallet supports, including bcash, completely irrelevant. And that causes people to get really, really passionate and feel like there's some ill motives going on here, man, because it's not viable to look at what's happening with Lightning right now and be quite as big of a doubter for most people, I think.
So I'll take the
statement. I'm going to let Paul respond. Yeah, I'm going to let Paul respond, and then I'm going to go to Jameson. But go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. So there was a statement there that said that the course of this entire discussion, if people who are non-technical came to it, they would come to the conclusion that Lightning doesn't work, and that was what I was apparently trying to prove, was that it doesn't work. Well, if you rewind this whole discussion from the very beginning, you'll even hear me say that just because we now have to have different balances in our wallet, right? And that was the contributing factor to it feeling more like an altcoin, is that it'll have separate balances. I clearly stated, if you don't remember, JW, that doesn't mean it can't work. That doesn't mean that that's dead in the water, that I have to have balances for the different channels that I open and that I have to have an on-chain balance in my wallet. The whole concept of the discussion was, does this thing feel more like an altcoin? And that was one of the reasons that it does. Not that because you happen to have it as a different balance that it can't work. I never stated that. I never implied that. I even stated the exact opposite of that, and that it could still work with you having a balance that's separate. It's that it's going to feel a whole lot more like an altcoin because you've got to hold a different balance, and that you might have to let the user know that it's a different thing and that you can pay different people with it. So once again, please rewind and
no, man. I know you're going to go to somebody else, but really quick, what I'm saying is that there is no question that Lightning works, right? And all of these, like, well, there's a lot of unanswered questions. I'm not sure how, can you even do this with channels, right? Those are viable questions, but the way that this is being presented is if we might not have answers to that, right? As if people like Elizabeth Stark are not going to go, yeah, of course, this is not a big deal. We've thought about it. We're writing code. It takes time, but it works. And there is no viable option. You cannot just throw the block size over. So we have to be adults and we have to be patient. And if, again, we have a business model that's predicated on altcoins being able to scale when Bitcoin can't, we got to expect that people are going to question that.
You're already blaming as if I don't want it to work specifically for a business model when that was never the part of the discussion. It's how to get it to work and how will it feel when we do get it to work. And the points that I bring up have nothing to do with what you're talking about. It has nothing to do with, oh, we can't work and therefore I want other altcoins to work because that's our business model. It was strictly, what is it going to feel like? How do we build it? What do we present to the user? What user experience can we bring? And all of that relative to, will it feel like a different coin? And if it feels like a different coin, then so be it. Then it feels like a different coin, but then I can do fast and quick payments with it. That was the whole scope of the discussion. And you're instantly making it. We never, at no point did we even bring up cash, Bitcoin Cash. We never brought that up in that entire scope of the conversation. You brought it up as if that was the point of what we were talking about.
Look, I'm not saying
nothing you've said has been at all technical or unsubstantiated. You've had like the least amount of actual substance behind what you say other than emotion. So this has been a very unproductive. Everything you've said has been 100% unproductive.
Let's we're all passionate people here, guys, obviously, and obviously JW is passionate as well, and I do get his points about the context of the basically what the situation that we have here between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. But I want to go to Jameson here and get his thoughts so far on the conversation. I don't want to have the call go too long, but I do want to maybe go one more round just to see whatever his thoughts are. So Jameson, please, what are your thoughts on the conversation so far?
Well, I mean, I think we've basically been having a product development discussion here. Can we make this product feel like Bitcoin, or can we make it a seamless user experience? Or are we going to fail at that attempt and end up with a high friction product that people are having to actually think about, moving between these different layers of payment networks or whatever you want to call them? It's a good discussion to have. I don't want to worry too much about like people's incentives or why they may want one thing to fail or succeed. And I guess one of the more discouraging things that I just hate to see in a lot of the discussions that happen, especially around scalability, we don't have all the answers to everything. And so it's very easy to become negative and pessimistic and be like, well, look, I don't see a solution. Nobody else sees a solution. And so things are looking kind of bleak. And maybe the result is that, the evolution of these networks are going to go in this direction. And so I think at least part of what it comes down to a lot of these discussions is sort of optimism or faith or just the belief that there are enough people who are motivated and expending their time and resources trying to figure out these unanswered questions. I think that can result in a big difference in perspective. And so, like, one thing that I did want to mention, which I don't remember the specific name for, but there was a paper a few months ago that was actually looking at creating what I think they were calling like a layer 1.5, sort of like a middleware layer between Lightning Network and Bitcoin to basically make multi-party channel funding a more feasible thing. And of course, this is, as far as I know, is only a white paper. And so it was very, very early days. Just somebody had an idea and they wrote it down. I don't think there's any code to support that this is something that can technically work. But it's just something, to throw out there. Like there are people who are thinking about some of these problems, and we may not know like what the stage that various solutions are currently at for them.
Yep. Yeah, that's great points, Jameson. And again, I just, as Paul said, I just kind of wanted to have a bit of a discussion, just how Lightning Network is going to be perceived and things like that, and how it is going to quote unquote feel. People can laugh at that about how it's feel, but no, this is important in software development. This is called user experience, and UX is absolutely extremely important in software software design, especially when it comes to, you know, these types of complex networks and things like that. So I just kind of wanted to have a discussion because, as Paul said, you know, he was talking about Elizabeth with it as well. And, you know, not everybody, and as Jameson said, not everybody has the answer. So I did want to have just a bit of a discussion on that to see what people think. So let's go to Udi then real quick on your thoughts so far on the discussion, Udi.
Yeah, so I think we mentioned a while ago the idea of Lightning being or not being a payment network. And it seems like obviously the goal is for it to be a payment network. But the interesting thing with all of this stuff is that we a lot of times don't know what's going to happen and how things are going to end up. And a very cool thing about Lightning is that it enables a lot of ideas that people were talking about for years but didn't implement yet, like payment channels. We were talking about payment channels for literally for years, and no one just built them in a fully secure way. And we can use them now. So you can take any Lightning implementation and use payment channels, maybe not as part of the network, and just have that, and that's definitely usable. And I believe that we'll see a lot of people doing that for various reasons. So who knows? That being said, I don't have my reckless hashtag shirt on me right now, but I think that it's very important to go and try this stuff out. It does work. I mean, I'm sending payments to people on Lightning, at least a few times a week. And it's usually for tests. It's not, I'm not buying a lot of hats, right? But it's definitely working. You can make it work, and you find out what the problems are in this process. And it's not only fun, you also gain a lot of confidence in how those things work and what problems in UX are still have to solve. And it's not, it's not just optimism. You can use it. It does work. And I'll be happy to help, if Paul wants after the show and to try and figure it out and have a payment between us. And Paul has a great team too. And I know a couple of the people on the team, and I know that they can do it much better than I can. And so, we can make it work. And I think Paul definitely agrees. I mean, he definitely said that he doesn't doubt Lightning could work. So, yeah, I think, we should just try it and use it. It definitely is possible.
I mean, it's a good point because, the code is out there now, and developers are working on this. And of course, we need more and more developers working on this. I mean, this is protocol level development. So this is the most specialized development you can get, so, I mean, to the point to where I think Elizabeth Stark has like an open development position for like 9 months on protocol developer. I mean, this is the whole industry is starving for these type of developers. And so, we definitely encourage people to download the Lightning source code. Again, there is 3 different implementations that you can go and check out right now, but they do all adhere to the Bolt standards. So definitely check that out and, see what you guys think. But let's go to JW then, and then we'll close it out with Paul after that.
Hey, yeah, so my thoughts are basically just a few bullet points. One, Lightning works. You can install it. You can work with it now. It's early software, so think of it like sending email, when Hotmail was in beta, right? It works. No intelligent person should look at it and go, I'm not sure if email is actually going to function. But at the same time, they probably shouldn't email their mortgage and not, mortgage paperwork and not follow up and make sure it's there, right? So that's the stage that we're at right now. And anybody that tries to give you the impression that it's not that far along, or there's major unanswered questions, or this may not work, is not doing you any favors. Anybody that gives you the impression that big blocks are viable is not doing you any favors. Even Microsoft, who is, they're not exactly cutting edge these days. They did a long report and published that scaling with large blocks is a really stupid idea. So anybody that tells you that's a good idea, don't listen to them. Anybody that tells you that proof of stake is viable as a way to scale blockchains is completely missing the security model. So we do have something, it works. The security design is solid. It's going to evolve, and it's all good.
Yep. And, of course, JW is a security researcher, so he definitely has his opinions on this stuff. And again, we encourage everybody to check this out. This is really early days still, and we are trying to have this discussion, one of many, to try to figure out how we want Lightning Network to work and how we want people to use it, because this is the days where we decide that kind of stuff. And as Udi said, I mean, it was only a little while ago that payment channels was was just a white paper, right? We just are getting this together now. And so we've launched, they did launch mainnet just a couple of weeks ago, a beta version on mainnet. So we're figuring this stuff out, but it is continuing to be more and more fascinating. And I just wanted to present a conversation with how we're going to start calling these things and naming these things. But I think for the most, the panel has consensus that, it pretty much just is time locked Bitcoin in a multi-sig, but there's much, it does get much more nuanced than that. So Paul, we'll go ahead and give you the floor and let you close out here.
Thanks. I'll kind of go back to something that Jameson said, that I think a lot of the kind of reaction is what was based kind of on optimism, like, hey, show that you're at least optimistic about it, and then people will be happier, as opposed to being so pessimistic or negative about it. I go, well, okay, well, I think that is something that should be equally shared on all attempts. Like I equally will show my concern over various scaling solutions, and I'll also show my optimism, in the sense that I showed my optimism and said, yeah, I think it can work. It just will have to look like a different wallet. It'll be a different separate, a different wallet. And that isn't once again, it isn't something that will be a nail in the coffin. It's just gonna feel different. It's gonna feel more altcoiny in that sense. At the same time, I don't like, and I don't listen to unsubstantiated statements that simply says that this is a completely broken security model, blah, blah, blah. Don't listen to them, blah, blah, blah. And don't even give them also the optimism of trying and putting different solutions at scaling in other mechanisms, whether it be proof of stake, delegated proof of stake, or larger blocks, and optimizing the code that helps process and propagate larger blocks. All of that is also early and untried, just like our whole ecosystem is early and untried. And to be so negative towards other people that may have a different viewpoint on how to achieve a similar goal, to me, is just very unconstructive. And that's what creates, to me, my biggest frustration when I try to communicate to anyone on Twitter, because I could say one thing in 200 characters and then something unrelated gets thrown at me that has that unsubstantiated tone to it. And so the overall feel that I have towards this industry is that if you're going to be closed-minded about it, you're probably not going to build anything useful. If you're open-minded and listen to the different angles, the different solutions that people are trying to put together, and realize that we all have a common end goal. We do want crypto to succeed. We want fiat to fail. Hopefully that's, within the scope of the listeners here, that's what we're trying to achieve. But be open to it, as opposed to just throwing everything out the window that isn't yours and isn't what you fundamentally believe in. And I think we can come to some really good solutions. But it's hard. It's really frustrating and hard to be in conversations when overly purist mentality starts to take over. Because ears just start getting close. So I just invite everyone, open your ears a little bit and be open to that, and be critical of not just others, but yourself and the stuff that you believe in. I think that's just a healthy thing to do. Be critical of yourself, be positive of others, and flip side as well. And I think that's where you're going to find the true solution that ends up being kind of discovered and adopted by most of society.
Yep. And that open discussion is absolutely something that, we try to encourage, and we love Twitter for it, that we can just all kind of come together, and we try to have longer form conversations like these on podcasts. But at the end of the day, it's up to everybody to try to remain as civil as possible, because, there's a couple of things we want to make sure, Paul, that we have an open discussion, but we also want to make sure that it goes somewhere at some point, right? We also got to make sure that, we eventually do decide that we eventually have goals that we can decide on, right? So that we can move on and then build the next thing, right? Start having the next conversation. So yeah, I mean, I'm really, really looking forward to having more and more conversation. And Paul, I just want to say, thanks again for coming on the show and giving us your thoughts. And I hope that we were able to deliver, a bunch of different thoughts and a bunch of different opinions from people much, much smarter than me today. And, I thank you guys so much for coming on again. So thanks again, guys, so much for joining us. Thanks to everybody in the chat and everybody watching live. And of course, everybody who missed the show, who's watching it now. Thank you guys so much for joining and tuning in. We really appreciate it. We try to bring you guys a new show every Sunday. So let's go ahead and say goodbye to our guests and find out where we can find them. Jameson, thank you again so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Where can we find more about you?
You can find me on Twitter at Lopp, L-O-P-P.
Lopp.net, ladies and gentlemen, one of the best resources for Bitcoin links out there for just trying to find out, how Bitcoin works and new information about it. He really does have a very, very, very concise list of good stuff. And of course, he is the manliest man in Bitcoin. So thank you so much, Jameson, for joining us. JW, where can we find out more about you, sir?
I'm at Weatherman I am on Twitter. And yeah, Paul, it was great talking to you, man. I hope we can get through that kind of first layer of debate and go a little bit deeper in the future.
Absolutely. Well, we'll try to have, everybody on as many times as possible. We try to do the show every Sunday, and we hope that you guys enjoy. So Paul, just again, thanks again, man, for coming on and sharing your thoughts. Where can we find out more about you, Paul?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, although it's not my preferred home, but Paulinator with 2 L's. So Paullina2OR. So on there, also at various conferences, we travel quite a bit. And I'd love to be able to meet people in person. I really love that. I love the face-to-face. I hate Twitter in all honesty. So getting a chance to speak with people like Udi face-to-face for lunch over there in Tel Aviv was awesome. I'd love to do that with you guys as well. So conferences where I love to be able to meet people in meetups, various cities for meetups.
Awesome, Paul. Yes, you will find Paul at almost every Bitcoin meetup. I've seen you, Paul, in so many pictures with so many meetups. You travel the world as much as Andreas, it feels like these days. But I guess that's kind of what Bitcoin has you do. It does have you travel all over the world and be a part of this amazing community. Udi, thanks again, man, so much for joining us. Where can we find out more about you and the projects that you're working on?
So you can find me on Twitter. It's good luck typing that. It's Udi Wertheimer, which is UDIWERTHEIMER, or you can,
we're gonna have all the links in below. Don't worry.
Me eventually, that's the better strategy.
Absolutely, and we'll have all the links, guys.
Thanks a lot for having me here.
You bet, Udi. Thanks so much, man, for joining us, especially on a Sunday, guys. We really appreciate your time. And I, of course, will have all the links to everybody in the links below. I'll have all their Twitter accounts because unlike Paul, I love Twitter. Twitter is my home. So you guys will always find me on there. So thanks again so much for joining, everybody. We really hope to see you next Sunday. We'll be talking about BTC Pay server and all that goodness. So thanks again for joining, guys. Until next time, keep talking Bitcoin. We'll talk to you guys later.